My name's Russell Callaghan and I'm the editor of UFO Data magazine. And I'm sure over the years quite a few of us will have met with each other and chatted about this fascinating subject that is ufology, UFOs, aliens, everything that comes under the banner. You know, we have a great time producing the magazine, and sad to say that since the demise of the newsstand version of UFO magazine and Graham's sad death some 3 years ago now, then you know, we wanted to carry on with something that put ufology, UFOs, aliens into the public domain and in a sensible fashion and in a sort of manner that was come to be expected from a magazine like UFO magazine. Firstly, thank you very much to those of you who continue to subscribe and support us. Without you, we just simply can't carry on. You know, subscription basis, single issues, they're all available, and you know how to get the magazine now, I'm sure. And if you don't, then there'll be some information on the end of this DVD. Now, over the years, I've had the pleasure of producing and being involved with several UFO documentaries, if you like, that was specially done for the ufologists and the researchers out there. Secret NASA Transmissions, the Hard Evidence series of DVDs and videos, The Journey. You know, over the years I've met some fantastic, very interesting people who have had a hell of a lot to offer this subject. A colleague of mine is somebody that you probably know as an author. He writes with us with the magazine, Philip Mantle. Philip's had several books published now, and we've got quite a few of them available in ebook form for just a few pounds on the internet site. So, you know, if you're stuck for something to read, take a look on our site. I'm sure you'll find some very interesting titles. But Philip was involved with Bufora for many, many years. And he was instigative, if you like, into the discovery, for want of a better word, of Ray Santilli and this intriguing alien autopsy film. The stuff's been seen on television. The stories have gone from positive to negative and back again. And, you know, many people think that, well, it's just a downright hoax. Many people have found strange things within the footage that claim Ray Santilli could never have found. People have come forward over this year, you know, claiming they were involved in the actual faking and the filming of the alien autopsy film that got out there. Ant and Dec, two great British, you know, young comedians, were involved in the film about the alien autopsy, which was, I've got to say, loosely based on the story around Ray Santilli and the events that happened from 1993 onwards. Over the past few months, UFO Data, along with Philip Mantle, who I'd like to term as probably the researcher behind the alien autopsy, was it or wasn't it case study, got in touch with people, confidences that had been kept for many, many years due to Philip's research. People were starting to come out into the open a little bit, and we got the cameras out and we paid visits to people, and we travelled around the country to meet some of the people involved in the original events that developed into the alien autopsy. We also talked to a researcher who's done a hell of a lot of work on the film stock, on the images on the film, and has found some fascinating discrepancies, if you like, that tend to lean in favour of Mr. Santilli. Now, Ray Santilli's never changed his story over these past 10-12 years, but the researchers have certainly found things that tell the story in different ways. What I'd say to you, sit back and enjoy this DVD production. We've enjoyed putting it together, and let's hope it's the first of many titles to come under the banner of UFO Data magazine. Once again, thanks very much for your support, and sit back and enjoy the film.
The first time I heard anything about the so-called alien autopsy was in about the summer of 1993. At the time I was Bufora's press officer, and I received a call from a chap called Ray Santilli. Didn't know this chap, never met him, and at first he just asked if myself or Bufora would be interested in helping out with a UFO documentary. No mention of Roswell or anything of that nature, so we said, yeah, well, probably. And we had several further telephone conversations in the ensuing weeks, and it was during one of those weeks that Santilli said, well, I happen to have footage of the UFO crash at Roswell, as he called it in those days, not Roswell, but Roswell. And not only the crash, but the autopsy of the recovered creatures. Would we be interested? Obviously we were interested. My reaction was, well, you know, this is just another story on the end of a telephone. Show us the film. So Santilli said, yes, I'll show you it. When? Later. When? Later. Yes, I can. No, I can't. It was a bit like a pantomime. This went on and backwards and forwards. You have to remember this is the days before email, so this was mainly on the telephone, occasional fax from Ray or one from me to him. And that's how it went. I met Ray Santilli in 1994 for the first time. Bufora was staging a lecture at the business school in London, and apparently his offices were nearby, so I invited him to the lecture, and that's when he retold me the story of how he claimed to have met this mysterious cameraman, bought the film for cash, and wanted to release it. Again, they'd show me the film, Ray, just show it. Yes, I can. No, I can't. And on it went. And so I left it at that. You know, I informed a few colleagues, both in the UK and overseas, that of this man's claims, and almost forgot about it. Then in early 1995, I received a copy of the Roswell movie on video, purely for review purposes. And that prompted me to remember this man, Santilli. He'd given me his business card, so I pulled it out of the file, rang him, and said, you know, do you still have this film footage, Ray? He says, yes, but you don't believe me, Philip. I told him to get lost. And I said, well, show me it. Okay, make an appointment and come and see me. So I think it was either February or March 1995. My wife and I drove to Santilli's offices in Balcombe Street in London. And, hey presto, he started to show me the film. First piece of film I was shown was the so-called tent footage. And over the next couple of months, there was 2 separate autopsies and what has become known as debris film. Now, in 1995, I was also Bufora's conference organiser. So thinking on my feet, I said there and then, once I'd seen the film, it was no longer just a story. Show it at the conference. I got one organised for August of 1995, and he said, yeah, okay. Didn't expect him to say yes. The reasoning for being that wasn't just to sell the conference. I knew that if we could show something like this at a conference, it would get the film out into the open. In my opinion, that was the best way we'd ever find anything out about this film, and I stand by that. The early days, when I first heard the story from Ray Santilli, I informed a few colleagues about his claims, because that's all they were at the time, just claims. And that included some of my colleagues at Bufora, some of the main Roswell researchers overseas. I wrote to them and informed them, and also the Mutual UFO Network. I was their representative in England, and I informed Walter Andrus, their head man at the time. And it was, again, just pretty much a story. They were intrigued, but no more than that. In 1995, when we'd finally seen the film, and the media started becoming interested in it, again, that was purely by chance. Certainly my colleagues at Bufora were apprehensive, to say the least. I think in some circles there was a little bit of envy, if you like, because I was involved and they perhaps weren't. But it was certainly one of apprehension. They didn't want to be thinking they'd been taken in by anything. But I stood by my initial reaction when I saw the film. We had a film. It wasn't a rumour anymore. It was there. This man was willing to show it at our conference. And again, I was confident that if we could get the film out into the open, then hopefully somebody somewhere would shed some light on it. If it was authentic, someone might come forward and say, that's my grandfather or my father, and he told me all about it. Alternatively, if it was a fake, someone would come forward and say, I'm one of the actors in it, or I was the sound man, or I was the cameraman, or whatever. That was my intention, and I stuck to it, and I would not move from that viewpoint no matter what. And I came under quite some pressure at some point from Viewfora, but I stood firm and I would not move from my stance. And I think today I feel vindicated.
My name's Keith Bateman. Originally I started just playing in normal bands from school. I then wrote a couple of songs. One was called the Yuppie Song and the other one was called I Can't Wait to Get on the Beach, and they were picked up by the BBC and a record company called Dingles, which had the hit Day Trip to Bangor. We had problems with the distribution of the single, although we did get play on Radio 1 and the BBC did the video. I was then approached by pardon me. I was then approached by a guy called Brian Paul from the Tremolos, who had two daughters called Karen and Shelley, and I wrote a couple of songs for them, which they got a deal with a company called Psy Records. I worked with them for a couple of years, and they became Elisa's Attic. We came across Ray Santilli when we were working with Brian Paul from the Tremolos. What happened is that they did a song called the Travelling Rinklets, and Ray was asking people to go around the different shops and buy the single back so it could push them into the charts. That's the first time I actually come in contact with Ray Santilli, because he actually paid me to go to some of the chart shops, to buy the single. Record companies tumbled this, and apparently the single was dropped by 16 places because they felt that something wasn't right. Later on, we did quite a few videos and bits and pieces for Ray Santilli. He used our facilities in Milton Keynes quite a lot. We also did a lot of re-records which we licensed to him. We would take bands like the Foundations, get some of the original members and re-record the whole their albums and then license that on. Also, we would license it to Ray Santilli. We had a 16-track recording studio plus a beta suite for video. We also had 10 animators working for us. Basically, they would most of the day they would just draw in, and we were also putting together making karaokes. We were one of the first companies to actually develop making karaokes. We were one of the biggest producers of karaokes at one time. Santilli we became quite good friends with Santilli, me and my ex-partner, Andy Price-Watts. We used to always be thinking of different video ideas, whatever we could, license to different companies or make. As we had the facilities there, it was just down to ideas. And sometimes we used to have quite good brainstorming sessions. Normally it was when we went to Cannes, the music fair or the film festival, and in the evenings we used to sit there and think, what can we make? One day he came up with this idea. He said, if I could get hold of some footage of Roswell 1947, of the alien crash, we could make a lot of money. So I sort of asked him, what he meant. We had an animator that had a book all about it, a guy called Phil Jarman. We looked at the book, saw exactly what how it all came about, and we went away and made the footage. Myself, my partner, Andy, our studio manager, Elliot, our tape op, and a butcher, and Andy's son. Originally, our studio manager was going to be the alien, but he wouldn't get on the table because it was too rickery. It wasn't stable enough for him to get on the table. So in the end, because Andy's son was lighter, he did it. It was a barn in Bedfordshire, and it was a friend of Andy's. The farmer was surprised we turned up. It wasn't planned. We just turned up and said, can we use your barn? He went, what are you guys doing? We said, well, we don't really know, but it's something to do with aliens. We we tried to, in my mind, to make the footage seem credible, it had to be that the cameraman was in a bit of a panic. He got this telephone call. He had to film this alien. He'd never seen an alien before. Everybody was panicking. He wanted to get as much down as quickly as possible, and that's what we tried to recreate. What we did is we had a Sony M3 camera at the time. It was one of the last valve cameras before the new digital ones came out. We filmed it on U-matic. We kept playing around with the apertures to give it this brightness and dark effect. We filmed it in colour, but very, very low light. The low light warning was on the camera all the time because we didn't want too much detail to be seen. We took it back to the studio the following day and we copied it to VHS. We then copied it back to beta because we wanted more generations to degrade it. We then put the beta through the computers, which allowed us to put special effects on the footage, also make it black and white. We also just speeded it up a little bit, but not constant, just in sections. After that, it was then dropped back to VHS, which gave us our master.
My name's Andy Bennett, and I was the production manager in 94, 95 at AK Music. Basically, I was before that I was a professional drummer, doing all the holiday camps, working at Butlins, Pontins, and all that, working with the comedy show bands. And when I left there, I got approached by Keith Bateman, who I knew for years prior to playing in other bands with him, and got offered the job at AK Music, which, and also I've been now, I'm Keith's partner now, so business partner. I've got to admit, at the time, I didn't know what was going on until one day Keith came up to me and said, look, we're going out on location today. Now, me being a production manager, I should have known this, but he said, look, we're just going out. He said, you know, there's a few of us going, Big Andy's going, and we want Elliot to come, who was basically like a studio boy at the time. So we all went, and even on the way, we ended up at this farm, and I knew nothing about what was going on until we actually got into the barn, met the farmer. The farmer obviously didn't even know we were turning up, and said, look, we're looking for a location. He took us into this back barn part where we ended up going. The place, I always remember, was full of rats running around. We got in there and there was, looked around, and I still didn't cotton on what we were doing. I mean, you know, it was an empty barn, you know, and still Keith never said to me what was going on, or Big Andy. And I always remember there was this, in the background, there was a bench, this bench thing, and Keith moved it into the middle. Then he got his door, put the door on top, and he just said to me, get on there. And I said, well, what for? And he said, well, there's your head. And he produced this alien head. And he said, you're the alien. He said, all you got to do is put your head to one side, we'll put a sheet over you, all you got to do is lay still. And I thought he was joking. I still didn't understand what was going on. So I said, you really want me to get on there? He went, yeah. But when we tried to get me on there, it was impossible because this door was rocking and rolling, and there was no way I would have got. Yeah, I would have ended up in another wheelchair. I'd have just, you know, I would have been on the floor. So basically, then he explained to me what was going on. We were making this alien footage. Then I remember the butcher turning up with all the bag of guts. He literally walked in, and I can remember the smell was horrendous. And basically then, so I just overseed what we were doing, and then when I realised what was going on, Big Andy, who was Keith's partner at the time, his son was there. He was about, I think at the time he was only about 12 years old, and he said he'd lay on the table. Well, I thought there's no way a 12-year-old boy is going to keep still for 20 minutes because they wanted 20 minutes worth of footage. But he did. He was absolutely brilliant. He didn't move a muscle, you know, and he just laid there. Why, as I say, I think he had these people like down the side of him pulling the guts out of him, and I mean it was all coming from the side, so they weren't actually touching him, but it, you know, from the way it was filmed, it looked quite authentic, you know. I remember the farmer. Basically, the farmer was stood by the side of me, and he was watching. And Keith said, Keith turned around and said to him, "Do us a favour, put that old coat on." He said, "Because we need the president." And we all looked at Keith and said, "Well, what do you mean the president?" So he stuck the coat on, and we got the guy to pace up and down, the farmer. And the whole thing was just, it was put together right at the last minute. It was, none of us really knew what we were doing. But the way it came out was the end result, well, everyone knows the end result, and we just winged it.
When Santilli had finally agreed to show the film at our conference, it was probably about April time, I received a call from a friend and colleague called David Clarke, now Dr. David Clarke. David was a journalist on the Sheffield Star at the time, and Sheffield was the city we were having the conference in August. Now, David was writing a story about a young lad who'd started up in UFO research, and he said, "Give us a couple of lines, Philip. I'll mention the conference, and we'll write something a bit nearer the time for you." Gave him a few lines, told him some of the speakers, and I said, "Oh, by the way, showing the alien autopsy film." That was it. Came out in the Sheffield Star. I was then telephoned by a company called White's Press Agency in Sheffield, who asked me some further questions, and I told them a little bit more, and thought that was it. Unbeknown to me, that story from White's Press Agency went around the world, and the rest, as they say, is history. We were receiving telephone calls and faxes from, you know, literally the four corners of the globe. They couldn't find Ray Santilli, because it just said Ray Santilli, London businessman. They couldn't find him, but you know, found me no problem at all. So there were those at the time who said, yeah, Ray Santilli had got this great marketing plan put in place. Well, I'm afraid he didn't. Up until then, Ray's intentions were to release it solely on video. You know, nothing. There was no media, no newspapers, no magazines, no TV involved at all. And it's then and only then that Ray's strategy changed. The television, literally, I received faxes from the major networks from all over the world. So Ray had an idea to do a screening, mainly for the media, but there were some UFO researchers involved as well, at the Museum of London on May the 5th. Invited audience, and that's where the television really got interested. They came from all over the world. There was a few UFO researchers there as well. Nick Pope was one of them, Kent Jeffrey another, and Maurizio Baiata from Italy. There were several, and that's how the media became interested. They saw it themselves for the first time that day on May the 5th, and Santilli went back to his offices and sold the rights to it around the world. My doubts about the authenticity of the alien autopsy film really began, I would say, after August 1995. We'd shown it at the conference, it had gone out across the world, you know, on television, it'd been in newspapers, magazines, and Ray always made no secret that he wanted to make money out of this film. He was a commercial animal, and he'd made a number of promises to have the film authenticated. Kodak in the UK were lined up, Kodak in the USA were lined up, we have private specialists lined up in various parts of the world, and if any one of these outfits or organisations had given their official seal of approval to that particular film, if they'd have analysed even one frame and said, yes, that is definitely circa 1947, the commercial value of that film would have risen enormously. It would have got the official stamp of approval. And Santilli, being a commercial animal, would have known that, you know, quite easily. So that led me to have doubts. You know, if this film was authentic, there was no reason on this earth why he shouldn't have it authenticated. It shouldn't be scientifically tested. Just one frame or a few frames would have been quite sufficient, and he didn't. And that's where the doubts set in. And I remember sitting at a restaurant in London with Ray discussing this, and I told him to his face, you know, if I can ever find this film, prove it to be a hoax, prove it to be a fake, then I will. And he said, well, that's fine, Philip. And he didn't say anything else. And I was determined to get to the bottom of it. Having doubts and just dismissing something, in my opinion, is not good enough. If you believe something is phony, is fake, or is a hoax, you have to prove it.
I rang Santilli, said, we've done this piece of footage, Ray, I think you're going to like it, and I sent it up to him we actually biked it to him. Ray had an account with a motorbike firm, and we just put it on his account and sent it up to him. I heard nothing from Ray for a couple of days. Then I got a phone call saying it wasn't very good, you know, can't use it, but could we put an access number on it, a restricted access number on there, and we'll try that. Santilli said it was no good, so we just sort of like thought, well, we'll sell it to somebody else later on. Ray Santilli rung me up and said, Keith, is it possible if you could make a better video? I said, well, it would cost a lot more money than what we've, you know, the production that we've just made. So he said, well, could you, you know, get me a budget? I rung up Pinewood Studios and asked them how much it would cost to make a mannequin model of an alien. They came back with prices between £15,000 to £25,000, depending on if we wanted it to bleed, if we cut it, bits and pieces. So I rung Ray Santilli and I said, I think we could probably put the package together for roughly about £45,000. He told me that was too expensive. So I never heard anything more from Santilli about the alien footage at all until I was up in his office for other reasons, and he said, Keith, can you give me your opinion on this piece of footage? And that was the second alien autopsy footage that he showed me. I said to him, yeah, it looked quite good, Ray, but I felt that it was a little bit too polished. It seemed to me not very convincing at all, and I was a bit surprised if anybody would have fell for it, but he seemed convinced that, you know, this was a great production he had here.
One of the curious aspects about this whole film, and I'll go on the record here and now, and this is the year 2006, I have no doubt that it is a fake. It's a complete hoax made for money, and I think I can prove that. I think I've got sufficient evidence to prove that. But the one thing that sort of leads me to think, well, not maybe about this film, but is there something else? Is there some kind of film out there? I mean, if we talk about Roswell in general, many of the eyewitnesses always said that film and photographs were taken. So it's not unreasonable to assume that maybe somewhere somebody may have seen this film. Now, my research has uncovered about 8 people, mainly in the United States, but not exclusively, who claim to have seen something, if not the same, but very, very similar, all of whom were prior to Santilli's ownership of it. Now, some of these are ex-military. One is a medical person here in the UK. Another is a multi-award winning press photographer in the UK. And they also have not the same story, but a similar story of having witnessed something not too dissimilar to what Ray Santilli has on his film. And that's why even today there are one or two who think, well, maybe, you know, Ray did have something to begin with, but made a mess of it or lost it, or, you know, the film was indeed destroyed before he could get it home. And that there could well be real footage out there somewhere. Now, I think we'd be foolish to rule that out. So we have a small band of people who claim to have seen something very, very similar to this. We also have one or two close encounter witnesses. A very famous one indeed, the late Betty Hill, said that in a personal correspondence to me, that the being on that film is the closest that she's ever seen to the beings that were encountered by herself and her husband Barney. Now, again, it doesn't prove anything, but it's just an interesting little side issue. So it would never surprise me if there wasn't something similar to this out there somewhere, but again, we only have stories, we have testimony, we have eyewitnesses. We don't have film or photographs, and until such day as we may have, then it's just an intriguing little side issue to the film itself, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. Maybe somewhere there is some film. It's a very intriguing aspect of the whole story.